Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador John Negroponte, Vice Chairman McClarty Associates, and Uzra Zeya, Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, U.S. Department of State.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce Uzra Zeya, who is the Undersecretary of State at the Department of State for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights. Ms. Zeya is a career diplomat who's had a variety of very interesting assignments during her career, both in Washington and overseas. And one of her most recent jobs was as the United States Chargé d'Affaires in Paris, France. And I'm sure she's probably prefers to be sitting where she is right now rather than dealing with the diplomatic fallout of recent events. In any event, our purpose this afternoon is to talk about the global refugee situation, prompted in particular by the downfall of the government Afghanistan and the withdrawal of United States forces there. And just by way of a very brief background, there's something on the order of 82.7 million forcibly displaced people in the world, according to United Nations statistics. And about 1/3 of those, if you also count, Palestinian refugees, if you include them in the numbers, about 1/3 are refugees outside their country of birth or origin. And more than 1/2 of this number of 82 million are internally displaced people. That is to say, displaced, dislodged in their own country. So my first question to Ms. Zeya is to Secretary Zeya is to ask her if she could discuss for us the situation in Afghanistan, both within and outside of Afghanistan, as it relates to refugees and internally displaced people. And again, welcome to Concordia.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Negroponte. It's really an honor to be here with you virtually and the entire Concordia Summit gathering. And I so appreciate your devoting time to this vitally important and urgent topic with respect to refugees and migration and the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan. And what I'd like to stress from the outset is just the degree to which the United States has an enduring and truly a generational commitment to the Afghan people. In my role as Undersecretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, I am responsible for the State Department aspect of the remarkably robust and generous humanitarian support that the United States has provided the Afghan people, some nearly $4 billion in humanitarian assistance since 2002. You know, in light of the tumultuous events of the last 8 weeks, we have stepped up to further increase this humanitarian assistance. And last week, in response to the United Nations high-level appeal, came forward with an additional $64 million in humanitarian assistance to vulnerable Afghans, and particularly to try to head off a deeper deterioration in the humanitarian situation with respect to food security, internal and external displacement. To do this, we work in lockstep with respected international partners like the International Organization for Migration, the UN High Commission for Refugees, and many non-governmental partners who are doing simply heroic work. And this assistance in itself does not connote any sort of recognition to the Taliban or or its related parties. But what we need to do is continue to mobilize the international community to meet the increasing needs for the Afghan people, to offer support to Afghanistan's neighbors as well. And this is part of what our substantial humanitarian assistance investment is doing to help neighboring countries and to help the long-standing displaced and internally and externally displaced Afghan civilian populations find safety, security, and dignity. And, despite the dramatic events of the last few weeks, this is, in fact, a longstanding problem. And as of 2021, there were over 2 million Afghan refugees registered in neighboring countries with UNHCR. And this is where the United States has played, quite simply, the leading global role as the leading international humanitarian donor to Afghanistan in meeting the needs of this substantial population.
And of course, winter's coming in Afghanistan, which will present humanitarian issues in their own right. And I've seen estimates that perhaps as many as 500,000 more Afghans might be expected in the coming months to seek refuge outside of the country. I might mention that since my experience goes back to the Vietnam conflict, after Vietnam fell and the Saigon government collapsed and our last troops were out of the country, perhaps the refugees came in waves, if you will. And the first wave was probably not unsimilar to the airlift we just witnessed a couple of weeks ago, where 100 and so many thousand Vietnamese left with our forces as they left Vietnam. That was the first wave. Then a lot of people ended up going into re-education camps and spent a certain amount of time in a sort of a Vietnamese purgatory for the next several years. And then about 4 years later, you had the famous boat people who came out of various parts of Vietnam suffering these very perilous ocean trips to the coasts of Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia and so forth. But that continued on for a long, long time. There were great costs involved in all of this, including setting up a machinery for dealing with refugees here in the United States, which I believe continues to serve as the model for what we are using to this day. And I suppose my question, among others, would be, what about congressional support and what about funding and costs for supporting these relief efforts? Because I suspect they're going to go on for quite a bit of time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for sharing your experience in Vietnam and your considerable diplomatic expertise, which we all can learn from. I would say that we have, along with my colleagues in the Department of State, the Department of Defense, USAID, the Department of Homeland Security, this is truly an all hands on deck U.S. government effort to do something truly historic. We have undertaken the largest humanitarian airlift of civilians in our nation's history, and in a almost inconceivably short amount of time, a little over 2 weeks, evacuated under some of the most dangerous and chaotic conditions imaginable over 124,000 civilians to safety. But this effort, as you mentioned, is not over. It is ongoing. This will be a multi-month, extending well into 2022, effort to bring Afghan civilians, many of whom fled the country literally with the clothes on their backs and after experiencing unimaginable trauma, including the August 26th bombing, which killed 13 American service members and over 180 Afghan civilians. We are welcoming these civilians through what can only be described as a remarkable model of international partnership and collaboration. We're working with our European allies in Germany, in Spain, in Italy. We're working with our non-NATO major allies, the UAE. We're also working in lockstep with Qatar to facilitate this mass movement of humanity who have arrived in remarkably large numbers on our shores as well. We're in the process of welcoming and providing health and other welfare and care to tens of thousands of at-risk Afghans who are searching for safety, for dignity, and who are embarking upon a new life in our nation, much like generations before them, fleeing peril and persecution, such as the Vietnamese refugees, Ambassador, which you mentioned, who have become absolutely a part of the fabric of America. And I myself, as a resident of Northern Virginia, and have witnessed firsthand the contributions of this community to the diversity and remarkable American story. You mentioned working with Congress. Certainly the administration is seeking to partner with Congress to ensure that we have adequate funding to best support this historic humanitarian operation, Operation Allies Welcome, as well as to ensure that these vulnerable Afghans whom we have taken into our care and whom we're relocating to the United States can receive the same benefits and supports as the refugees that we resettle proudly through the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program, of which the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration is a lead implementer. But I have to point out and thank my colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services, because our refugee admissions as well are truly a whole of government effort. We look forward to working with Congress on this and welcome their support.
Yeah, and I think your refugee program is very well conceived in the sense that it's not just to get people here and then kind of drop them and leave them on their own. I think there is funding, if I'm not mistaken, included for making it easier for people to integrate into American society through whatever it is, language training, initial stipends to keep people afloat and so forth, so that there's it's smoothen the transition, if you will, for these very welcome people. I was wondering if you might, I think I understood that you issued your Refugee Bureau report today, the State Department. I didn't know if there were any highlights of that you had wanted to mention for us. And also, if you could address what, if you have any suggestion as to how Americans, I mean, Concordia is about public-private partnerships. So what can Americans do to help people in this plight? I understand there's a website. I think it's called welcome.us,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if there's a way of putting it up here, but in any case, welcome.us. But can you say something about that?
Absolutely. Public-private partnerships, Mr. Ambassador, and I'm so happy to hear of Concordia's support for that. I would say refugee resettlement in America truly is a story of our leadership as a nation of immigrants, and also what animates our country in terms of a desire to help one another and to help the less fortunate. So we are seeing a really unprecedented outpouring of public support that crosses all barriers of geography, of partisanship, of background, and truly a spirit of Americans to welcome and support these new arrivals from Afghanistan. And we're very excited to report that the State Department is partnering with Rockefeller Philanthropy Partners on this project called Welcome US. And I'm going to hold up the little page here. I wish we had a little more zoom with my camera, but it's https://welcome.us. Just Google welcome.us, and it's really a wonderful initiative. The honorary co-chairs are 3 former presidents and first ladies, Presidents Obama, Bush, and Clinton, and over 250 organizations, private sector, non-governmental leaders, veterans groups, faith organizations have signed up to this initiative, which is seeking to channel private sector as well as public support to help at-risk Afghans resettling in the United States meet their basic needs and get the support they need to thrive and contribute to our communities. So that is, again, welcome.us. Any contribution can help this effort, and I think it really illustrates our commitment as a country to support Afghan partners, but also to live up to our history and traditions as a nation of immigrants. There's also another website I'd be happy to point your summit members to, called www.rapsnet, WRAPSNET.org. And this has, under the heading resources, a list of the leading resettlement agency partners with whom the State Department, HHS, and DHS rely. Because again, resettling vulnerable civilians from all over the world is truly a public-private partnership. So these are great organizations that exist all over the country, including in our backyard in Washington and certainly in New York City, where if you're interested in supporting newly arriving families or making donations, they would welcome your support.
Well, that's wonderful.
In terms of
news.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned, Ambassador, I do want to just flag that President Biden is committed to revitalizing and strengthening the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program. So we are proud to support his commitment to admit up to 125,000 refugees. This would be a record number in fiscal year 22 to reaffirm that commitment. And all of these efforts, Welcome U.S., the many private resettlement partners with whom we work, they're all part of this undertaking.
So just in the brief time we have left, separate from the refugee issue, but definitely in the portfolio that you supervise, President Biden is going to be hosting a democracy summit on the 9th and 10th of December. And I was just wondering if, as a last item in our agenda, you might want to be willing to preview that upcoming summit for our participants.
Absolutely. We're very excited to support the President's Summit for Democracy, and this will be taking place December 9th and 10th, virtually in its first iteration, and it will be followed by what we hope will be a year of action among a very diverse grouping of well-established and emerging democracies working in partnership with civil society and the private sector to move the ball in 3 core areas. 1 is countering authoritarianism, 2 is elevating the fight against corruption, and 3 is standing up for human rights at home and abroad. So this really reflects the President's commitment to center our democratic values and human rights in our foreign policy, as well as to come together, to listen to one another, to stand together and rally together as democracies to show that our approach, open societies, rooted in the rule of law, rooted in accountability to our citizens, and rooted in free and fair elections, respect for human rights, and protecting the vulnerable, that this approach is really the one to prevail in the historic contest between democracy and autocracy all over the world.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure from this brief time that we've had with Undersecretary Zeya that you understand why President Biden and Secretary Blinken have placed the great confidence in her that they have. We want to thank you for joining us today. We hope that maybe at future sessions of Concordia, we might have a chance to explore some of the other issues that are under your sweeping portfolio. But meanwhile, please join me, everyone, in thanking Undersecretary Zeya for her remarks this afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you.